Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Juliane Campfield. I'm the director here at Deutsches Haus at NYU, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to a talk by Professor Thomas Straubhaar from the University of Hamburg, who will talk about radically fair, how the universal basic income is modernizing the welfare state. This is also the title of his recent book, which you can see there. Of course, in German it's called Radikal, gerecht. And then the subtitle is so long that I can't remember it. But it's something with bedingungslose.
The subtitle is the story.
Yeah. So actually, I can read you the German subtitle for those of you who dare to learn German or who consider it at least. How the universal basic income is modernizing the welfare state in German, wie das bedingungslose Grundeinkommen den Sozialstaat modernisiert. That sounds really scary in German, maybe. But it's not supposed to be scary because it's a, I think, good idea. And like the people, I think, sitting on this side here, I think they all share the idea that it's basically not a bad idea. But other people think it's a bad idea. So we'll hear more why people think it is a bad idea, why people think that it is a good idea, and the more detailed reasoning behind these thoughts. So after Professor Straub's lecture, Christian Martin, who is I'll read his bio in more detail. He's the Max Weber Chair at the Center for European and Mediterranean Studies, will respond and engage in a dialogue with Thomas Straubhaar. And we are really delighted to collaborate again with SEMS. And it is a pleasure to continue our conversation and collaboration. And let me do some shameless self-promotion on behalf of Deutsches Haus. On Friday, we have an event here with the German author Esther Dischereit, Garz erzählt, Garz Talks. Garz is a little village in the Brandenburg, Sachsen-Anhalt area in the neighborhood, so to speak, of Berlin. And why am I saying this? Because in a way that ties in to what we'll discuss here and partially discuss, like why a universal basic income can be a good thing for a society, because in this little village, for example, you have like whatever 145 people in a former GDR area that is partially depressed and has a, shall we say, potential for right-wing voters just for different reasons. And I think this will be part of the discussion of this event and the event on Friday. And of course, living in a country we currently live in, we also might want to think why people voted in a certain way and how perhaps a universal basic income might change people's minds about whom they vote for. This is, of course, not the main focus, but these are all thoughts we might want to consider as we listen to Thomas Straubhaar and Christian Martin. And now I will introduce Christian. Christian Martin is the Max Weber Chair of German and European Studies at NYU's Center for European and Mediterranean Studies and Professor of Comparative Politics at the University of Kiel, Germany. He holds a doctorate from the University of Constance. Before joining NYU, Christian Martin was a postdoctoral researcher at the Max Planck Institute in Jena, an assistant professor at the University of Hamburg. Maybe that's where you met, well, I don't know, but we'll see. And a visiting assistant professor at Northwestern University. His current research project is on backlashes against globalization and EU integration. So please now join me in welcoming Christian Martin.
Thank you very much, Juliane. Thanks, everybody here at Deutsches Haus. And thank you, Thomas Straubhaar, for making the trip to New York and telling us about universal basic income. I enjoy these events here at Deutsches Haus. A lot of the things that we do, we as the Max Weber Chair, I'm using the collective plural, would not be possible without an institution like Deutsches Haus. It's such a diverse program that we have here with such diverse audience that engages with the topics that we discuss, and it's always a pleasure to be here, so thank you very much. I met Thomas when we taught an interdisciplinary seminar in one of the graduate studies programs at University of Hamburg. They have a program there, Politics, Economics, Philosophy, that's modeled after the British model, and they have these interdisciplinary seminars taught by economists and political scientists. And we did that twice, and it was always a lot of fun. So I invited Thomas to come here to New York, and presenting this book is an excellent opportunity that, as we can see, garners a lot of interest. Thomas Straubhaar is the chair of international economics at the Department of Economics at the University of Hamburg. From 1999 to 2006, he was the president of the Hamburg World Economic Archive, and from 2005 to 2014, the director of the Hamburg Institute for the World Economy. And when he stepped down from that position, he had finally time to write again, and one of the results of that writing is the book that we will discuss today. Thomas has published widely on migration, demographic change, and technological change, so all the topics that are relevant to discussion of universal basic income. He is the recipient of the prestigious Helmut Schmidt stipend of the ZEIT Foundation at the Transatlantic Academy in Washington, D.C., and of the Ludwig Erhard Award for Excellence in Communicating Economics. He is one of the most prominent economists in Germany and frequently contributes his economic expertise to German language news media. In fact, whenever you turn on Deutschlandfunk in the morning, more often than not, you will hear Thomas commenting or being engaged in an interview on macroeconomic issues mostly. It is my pleasure to leave the floor now to you, and I'm very much looking forward to your presentation on the universal basic income.
Thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you, Christian, for the nice introduction. Actually, you have said so many nice things that the bench is now quite heavy to our shoot. So I hope not to disappoint you and to really fulfill your expectations. Thank you, Juliane, for having me in the Deutsche Haus. I'm impressed by the atmosphere here in this house. Actually, I like the garden. This is a beautiful spot here in New York. I think it's rather seldom to have such a closed neighborhood as you have it here. Indeed, this is a pleasure for me being here, and I hope that you are still looking forward even after my presentation, because my experience with the book is that there are quite a range of acceptance of my idea of a universal basic income. Let me probably say that the first attempts to approach this issue stems from a book that we have done 10 years ago. It was actually at the time in Germany when we had some problems about the future of the social welfare state, and I did it with Ministry of State Dieter Althaus in Thuringia, and we tried then to show that probably there is some kind of a renewal of the social market economy concept, the concept that has actually led to the German miracle after World War II. And at that time, actually, and I checked it for this recent book, the term of digitalization or digitization didn't play a role at all. So we didn't know about digitalization or digitization. So, and this is new. And I think this was a starting point to do rethink whether we should have a kind of change in the social welfare state of Germany. And that's probably some titles you will know. These were New York Times bestsellers. The one that says that technology and the threat of a jobless future, that somehow robots will substitute people, will take away jobs from people. And of course, you can imagine that the state that is somehow financed by taxes applied or levied to work, to the workforce, will come under pressure if robots instead of people are going to do the jobs. And that's probably the first, let's say, reason to rethink the welfare state. How are we going to react to this technological change. And Bill Gates, actually a week ago, has proposed in a video, in a YouTube video, that we may probably tax robots. The problem if you are going to tax robots is that you may probably harm yourselves, because taxing robots means to lower the incentive to implement robots into the production process. And if you are not going to implement robots into the production process, productivity of labor is not going to increase as much as it could. And if productivity of labor is not going to increase, wages will not increase. Actually, they may probably be not competitive to compete with jobs from abroad, from people that are not going to tax robots, that somehow people abroad that are working with robots may become more productive, more competitive. And that means that probably taxing robots at the end of the day will have a negative impact on the job development. Then you may probably protect your job as a worker against the robot, but you may probably lose your job to the competitor abroad, the worker who is going to make use of robotics. Actually, to ask Bill Gates, what is a robot? When would you say this is a robot we should tax, and when is it just intelligent machinery that is implemented without taxes? So that was the starting point of my book. And then the second point, that is actually also something, as you just, Juliane, said when she was introducing Christian, what is of your interest and what I think is in the interest of most people nowadays, that we realize somehow that something is going wrong. And I'm not going to say that it may end in having a president that probably is somehow different than the presidents before. But we have similar tendencies in Europe, of course, that somehow people feel not so happy with the outcome of the distribution of wealth, the distribution of income. That people think that in days of robotics, the gap between the richer and the poorer part of the population is not going to be closed or to become closer, narrowed, that it may even be wider than before. And this is something people may not accept, because different to the pure image of economic man behaving in a way that the person is always going to accept solutions that improve their livings. And contrary to this image, people are not going to approve, are not going to accept solutions if they think that the value added, the benefit is shared in an uneven way, that some people get a lot and a lot of people get only a few out of a beneficial solution. So that they may probably even skip the idea of a European Union, that probably Marine Le Pen is going to lead France out of the European Union as Cameron did for the British. So that's the question whether and how we may react to the empirical evidence that somehow there is a rise in inequality in societies. And that leads me to the structure of the book, the content of the book, what actually is structured into three parts. The first part is the analysis. What are the solutions? What are the challenges? What are the problems? Why do we need a kind of revolutionary new model for the social welfare state in Europe, specifically in Germany? And the second part is then the answer. How could we solve the challenges? How could we manage the challenges? And that's, of course, the UBI, the Universal Basic Income. And then probably we may end up with a conclusion, just to have a kind of summary at the very end. So let me start with the problem. What is the problem? What is different? What are the challenges of this 21st century? And of course, it starts with two kinds of changes, both leading into the same direction. Whether you start with globalization or with digitization, both have a very, very simple consequence. The consequence is that somehow labor becomes more abundant. Why? Globalization has opened up national markets, and it has included million, actually a billion or more people competing with jobs in the United States, with jobs in Europe, with jobs in Germany. So more labor becomes more abundant. And the same happens again with digitization. Now it's not people from China or people from Southeast Asia, it is the robot that is going to compete, is going to substitute human labor force. Economically speaking, that means if something becomes more abundant, it becomes cheaper. And the more scarce factor becomes more expensive. That means if you are going to look at the shares of income distributed either to labor or capital, the more abundant factor labor gets less and less, proportionally speaking, and the more scarce factor, capital, gets a larger and larger piece of cake. And that's actually what you can read with Thomas Piketty's The Capital in the 21st Century. That's very simple. That says that the gap is increasing between the capital owners, the capitalists, and the workers. And that's the first part of the story. And the second part of the story goes about demography and human behavior. Demography says that, fortunately, by the way, fortunately, it's a challenge but not a problem. We all get older and older, aging societies, having more people from the elderly part of the population with a stronger need for support over a longer lifespan. That means that if you are going to keep constant the financing of the retirement system, you will run into problems. Because less and less younger people have to earn the money to be spent for the larger and longer need for retirement people. So that means you have two options. Either you are going to increase the fees, the contributions for the labor force, the pay-ins, or you are going to lower the payouts. And this is easy to see, and you can take every vote in Europe for the last couple of years, and actually also in the United States, and then you see how elderly people will react. I mean, that's somehow understandable. I mean, if you have the political power and the decision is either you are going to increase the burden for the younger or you are going to lower the payouts for the elderly, then you are going to vote the burden for the younger, the weaker part in the society. And last point is somehow how we will live and work in the future. In the past, this was a linear behavior and a linear somehow path of living. You entered the workforce, you stayed there for about 40, 45 years, and then you stepped out into the retirement Nowadays, you have many more breaks. And actually the point is, for the two lower arguments, the point is that more and more people from the younger generation will not get a full pension in their retirement age due to the fact that first, there is a tendency from the demography that they have to pay in more than they get out at the end. And second, because they do not fulfill the requirement of having worked the 45 years full time. This is not the reality anymore. And it's not just for women. It's also for males, because they probably have to step out of the working process just to have a further education, to get new insights, to have a kind of specific fulfillments that are required for earning more and more. So that's the challenges. These are the challenges. Now, what is the solution to globalization, polarization, changes, and the demography that somehow turns around the pyramid of an aging population? What is the solution? First step, as a scientist, as a person who has somehow to do an analysis, is to somehow define what are the criteria that should be fulfilled from a welfare state in the 21st century. And of course, it starts somehow with effectiveness. Effectiveness means, does the social welfare state of the 21st century really reflects daily life of the mass? Is this really something that is close to people, close to their daily experience? Or is it something that comes from a very, very long gone past, like the one we have today, the Bismarckian welfare state of the 19th century, that was created in the 19th century when there was a kind of high times of industrialization, where people worked 60 or more hours per week on the assembly lines of the industries. So the first point is, does a welfare state of the 21st century somehow reflect the breaks that I have just talked about? Does it really is something that matters for the people? Or is it something that they think is not my life, it's the life of my parents or grandparents? Second point is efficiency. A welfare state should somehow be efficient. That means it should reach the goals, the aims with the minimum costs. This is economics, of course, and you may somehow be, you may say that there are other goals to be fulfilled. Yes, of course. But the economic goal is central. Why? Because if you are going to fulfill a goal with the minimal costs, you have enough money, you have the maximum of financial meanings to support the poorer, what I think should be the aim of a social welfare state. And of course, simplicity and transparency is the pre-requirement of efficiency. Because if people understand what they are going to do, their willingness, their ability, their acceptance of financing, of paying taxes is much higher. This is well researched empirically with data from countries like Switzerland, where you have a lot of different tax systems, and where you can see that if people understand the tax system, if they think it's fair, and the money is somehow spent reasonably, then their willingness to pay taxes is higher. Then they are not going to avoid in the black market economy and to do some informal jobs or work just to avoid paying taxes. The third one is liberal in a European sense, in a German sense, not probably in a US sense. It's not libertarian, it's liberal. Liberal means that somehow you have no preconditions to be fulfilled to get social support. That means it's not a condition that you are male or female, young or old, or employed or unemployed. So everybody, without any pre-requirements, should be treated the same. That's liberal. To treat every person the same and not to discriminate, not to prefer some behavior against another. And the last one is the fair one, the fairness criteria. As I said before, this comes from a concept we call prisoner's dilemma. And the prisoner's dilemma says that there may be a situation that for individual reasons, you may not, if everybody is maximizing, is just looking at its own position, then you may somehow not find a compromise that would help everybody, that would make everybody better off. This is actually the argument behind the fairness argument, that you should find a solution that at the end of the day, people that are better paid pay more taxes. And this is meant in an absolute and in a relative sense, as I will show you in a minute. So that is the framework, that are the criteria to be fulfilled to call a social welfare system somehow working well, a well-working welfare system. And that's now the unconditional basic income. And these are the concepts. These are the cornerstones of this concept. First point is that there will be, or there is a flow of money to everybody all the times, independent of every criteria, unconditional. The whole lifelong, you get a payment from public coffers to individuals, independent of all kind of preconditions. And that's it. That's also to say, that's it. That's all you get from the social welfare state. Second point, there is no other scheme anymore, no retirement system, actually no unemployment system, no public health system. This is something I'll come back later on, I'm sure, that there will be a question about this, how we may organize the health insurance. So you would just give up, and that's why I call it a revolution in a way. You would just replace, substitute the system as we have it today in Germany. The third point is about the financing of the social welfare state. And there is a complete new system somehow needed. And the new perspective is that you would not tax specific factors of production in a different way. You would not tax labor different from capital income. You would treat them in a similar way, in an equal way. Same tax rate, independent, whether you are a worker earning money and getting a wage, or whether you are a capitalist, a capital owner, getting money in form of interest rates, dividends, stock market sales and business, whether you get income as a tenant, whether you get income as from other kinds of sources of capital, it doesn't matter. It's all treated and taxed the same way. At the source. Why at the source? Because if you are going to tax it at the source, you do not have to declare your tax situation. You do not have to fulfill tax forms anymore. It's simple, transparent, easy understandable, difficult to avoid get taxed because you are going to tax it at the source. That means when the factory, when the enterprises, the firms are going to produce something, as long as they are firms, they are not taxed at all. So you would just drop all the taxing of companies. Why should you tax companies? Companies are actually providing jobs and doing something socially beneficial. They are giving workers a job. What you are going to tax them once they are going to distribute the outcome of production to the factors of production. I forgot profits, that was the one I searched for. So wages, interest rates, profits, all taxed the same way. Okay. Now let's look at the tax incidence. What does this mean for different incomes? On the x-axis, you have the gross income. On the vertical axis, you have the net income. The black line is the situation where gross and net is the same, no state activity. No taxes, no subsidies, no transfers. The gray line is the net income after taxes and after having received the universal basic income. So let's do an example that you understand how it will work. Let's take a person having a gross income of 0. That's a person that has no income at all. This person will get the universal basic income, €1,000 per month. So the net balance, the gray line, says that a person with 0 own income has a total of €12,000 per year as the net income. Then, as I've said, the value-added tax, every euro you earn, independent whether as a worker, as a capitalist, or as a profit maker, every euro is taxed, in my example, these are assumptions, by a 50%. That means every single euro you earn, 50 cents are for you, 50 cents you pay taxes. So a person, let's say, let's take here, 24,000. This person has a gross income of 24,000, levy a 50% tax. So that means 12,000 for me, 12,000 for the public coffer. So I have earned 24,000 gross, means net 12,000 out of my performance, plus the 12,000 universal basic income, means 24,000 net income, 12 plus 12. So this person actually, you see it in the connection, in the intersection with the black and gray line, means this person is just the break-even. A person earning 24,000 by his or her own work is break-even. It means it does not get a subsidy, but it does not pay a tax. It's just on the break. It's just a net zero position. That's the dotted line here. People with an income below 24,000 would get more from the state than they pay taxes. They are net, they have a net benefit, net gain. They are getting more subsidies than they pay taxes. People with an income higher than a 24,000, above 24,000, they pay taxes. Understandable, more or less? And of course, this depends on first the size, the level, the amount of the universal basic income, and the tax rate. But with a tax rate of 50% and the universal basic income of about 12,000, the break-even is 24,000. Yes, please.
So if you don't work and you receive the universal income, you have to pay 6,000 in taxes?
No. Good point. Very good point. Thank you so much. Excellent question. The universal basic income is tax-free. Great question. Thank you. Okay, more or less. Yes, please.
What is the average income in Germany?
Good question. For the moment is about 36,000. We can come back to this. These are fair questions because you can now, in your back mind, you could already start to search arguments against. And one standard argument against is if you are a family with 4 people, husband, wife, 2 kids, you will get a 48,000. That is more than the average income for a worker, for a person, for an average German at the moment. I'm sure we will discuss this later on. But good question. Understandable still? Are you still with me? Okay. So, important. I forgot something. You see, the higher your income is, the higher is your absolute tax balance. People with a high income pay more taxes than people with a low income. Actually, people with low income, they get even a subsidy. They get even a payment. They get even something from the state. But that's fair. The broader the shoulders, the more you can carry on taxes, right? But that is the absolute definition. There is also a relative fairness argument. That says the more you earn, the higher is the relative net tax rate. That has something to do with the constant, the 12,000, the constant payment of the UBI. But you see, this is even a progressive tax system. That means it's not only that you pay in absolute terms more taxes, it's also in relative terms. The more you earn, the higher your income is, the higher is the tax rate, the net tax rate you have to carry. Will it work? Is this efficient? Can this be economically workable, feasible? I have no doubt about it, yes. And actually, there are a lot of polls, a lot of surveys, a lot of questionnaires, questions asked people. How would you react? We could do the test afterwards with you. Ask yourselves, would you be willing to work when your subsistence, your minimal needs are covered? Most people say yes, because the minimal income, to have the minimal subsistence covered is not enough. I would like to have more. Actually, if we have time, I could show you that one of the reasons for the German job miracle of the last couple of years is exactly the proof for my argument. Because if you look where the jobs have been created in the last couple of years, there's millions of jobs in the last 10 years. Most of these jobs have been created in sectors where the net surplus, the net benefit per hour is less, or about €2 per hour. Because I can explain you later on, that is the mystery of the German system, that once you come back from unemployment into employment, when you get a job, the marginal tax rate is immense. It's really immense. It is just like an iceberg effect. Because from the first euro you earn, you have to pay social security contributions. And this is about 40%. That's a lot. That's a lot that you have to pay when you come back from unemployment into work. So most people say, yes, of course we are going to work, even if we have covered our subsistence. If you are going to ask the same people, what do you believe is your neighbor going to do? Then they say, this guy is completely different than I am. This person would immediately stop working. So that's what I call a paradox. For yourself, you are supposed still to work. For others, you think they are going to stop working. Second point, I think this is a historical chance of mankind to rethink work. If we have robots, why are we not going to let them do the work? Why are we still doing dirty, dangerous jobs or work that makes you ill, that gives you a burnout, that makes you somehow, gives you diseases of all kinds? Why are we not just substituting this kind of work by robots? This is not an attack of robots. This is a kind of support. The robots is not an enemy. It is a friend. It is someone who is going to take all this stupid, dangerous work and let us do whatever we want. Why not? The next argument is with regard to the trade unions, that they say, wow, it's suspicious that all these attempts now come or stem from the Silicon Valley, where the CEOs are going to say we should have a kind of robot taxing or a kind of universal basic income. What do they have in mind, really? My answer is, a universal basic income is going to increase the market power of the workers, because they could say no. Nowadays, they cannot say no. If they say no, then they are out in poverty. So they have to accept every job. Even if it's insane, they have to take it. Just by brute force, because they would suffer without having jobs. If they have covered their basic needs, they could negotiate. They have a bargaining power. So we would have to pay higher wages. What's wrong about that? For many rather unqualified jobs. Yeah. Is it liberal? Yes, of course, it's liberal. If you do not have preconditions, you treat everybody the same. There is no kind of discrimination anymore. Why are we going to tax capital income different from labor income? What's the reasoning behind it? Most people would say that's because capital is somehow mobile. It would go away if you're going to tax it. Empirical evidence tells us another story. It says that most capital is invested close to home, because you are going to appreciate local knowledge. You are going to appreciate neighborhood. You are going to appreciate legal certainty. Is it fundable? Are we talking about the utopian situation? Wrong question. Good question, but wrong question. First of all, you should ask yourselves, what are you expecting from a welfare state? The first question is, what is the goal of a welfare state? Do we want a kind of welfare state as in Scandinavia, or one in the US, or would you have something in between? That is a political decision. It's not me as an economist telling you what is the right size of a welfare state. This is a political decision. This is something that the society can decide on its own. An economist would just tell you the consequences of your decision. That if you have a high level of universal basic income, you have to increase taxes. And if you are going to increase taxes, incentives to work will be lower. Yes, this you have to calculate. And if you have a low level of universal basic income, you can have low taxes, and low taxes means a high incentive to work. So you have to balance and to decide on your own, and this is a political decision. Let me finalize. Let me come to the summary. What was my plan? What is my message? My message is that the 21st century is so completely different than the past that we should not fix or should not be fixed, and we should not keep old systems that are old-fashioned. If the world is going to change, you should not try to stop the world turning around just that you can keep your old system. If the world is going to become different, then adjust the system. That's, I think, the only feasible way. And there are a lot of challenges. I'm not going to repeat them another time. But I think that there are a lot of things that will be so different from the past that the system that has started in the 19th century is not the correct answer to these challenges. Last point, last slide. I'm an economist. I'm not a theologist or a psychoanalytical, whatever, scientist. I'm a hardcore economist. I'm not going to say that I think the people are somehow morally good or bad. I'm not going to change the minds of the people. I'm not going to say that the UBI is going to make people more moral. I take them as they are. So there will always be people that are going to somehow make negative use of the system, that they are going to misuse the system. They are going to try to cheat the system, that they are going to try to maximize their individual situation by just giving or treating or behaving in an insane way. This will always happen. My point is that the future is not going to be dependent on the people that are cheating. They are cheating anyway. They are somehow lost for the society anyway. So let them go. Let them do their job. They are not really the people that are going to determine whether we will live the way we did and we would like to live in the future. The point is we should give the people that are willing, that would like to do something, we should support them. We should give them an incentive. We should have the potentials in our focus, not the problems. So turn around the perspective of the welfare state. And last point is, it is not solving every problem, but it makes most problems more easily to be solved. Thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for this fascinating presentation. I will now comment on a few short points before we open the discussion. I will start with an observation. You mentioned in your closing remarks that this is an old system that goes back to the 19th century and that the future will be nothing like the olden times. I would like to apply a historic perspective that's a bit broader and point out that in some ways the situation that we have in the post-war era, from starting at around 1950 to about, however you want to look at it, 1973 or 1989, so when the crisis and globalization started to hit, is in some way an historical exception where you could make a middle-class life without any capital, be it physical capital or human capital, because it was enough to finish high school, or maybe not even that, get a job at one of those capital-rich production plants in Detroit, and afford a middle-class life with 2 cars, vacation, and send your kids to college. That is an historical anomaly if you take a broader, a longer-term perspective. Against that backdrop, the social democratic narrative of how social cohesion and peace was maintained through mass employment and through a fair sharing of the proceeds from capital and labor is questionable because it applies only to this very short, comparatively very short period of time. So if we think in a broader perspective, then maybe universal basic income would be more of an answer than trying to achieve full employment in a context where we have demographic change, interruptions to work life, and automation, massive investments in robotics, and globalization, and all that. What has changed is that we are now in an age of mass democracy. We have a median voter who is not a capital owner, or makes only the smallest part of his or her income from capital gains, and therefore politically demands a solution to the challenges that we are facing in this post-mass production environment. And the political challenges that are presented through that development, we saw in the most recent elections in this country, we see them in the upcoming elections in Europe, and maybe reducing inequality through a universal basic income would be one of the solutions. Take that as an introductory remark. I will now play devil's advocate and address 3 issue areas that may challenge the idea of a universal basic income. These 3 issue areas are economics, politics, and philosophy, normatively speaking. And my first question is the UBI economically sound? UBI would require not taxing capital, you pointed that out, but proceeds from capital investment nonetheless. We have to do that to generate the revenue needed for universal basic income. Taxing capital or proceeds from capital is problematic for a number of reasons. First, it reduces the speed of invention. If capital investments become less attractive because of higher taxes on capital, then the incentive to innovate decreases. This could decelerate the rate of technological progress, thereby undermining the UBI project that seems to rely on substituting capital for labor. Let robots do the dirty, boring, and unhealthy work. So that the unemployed workforce can enjoy more meaningful or more relaxing lives. Second, taxing capital or proceeds from capital investments could lead to national and international tax competition. Nationally, if you have subnational units that have the authority to set their own tax rate, like in this country, think of the Delaware effect. That's why all the companies are headquartered in Delaware, because they have no taxes on, they have no corporate taxes. And international tax competition is the prime example of adverse results from globalization. We have already seen a shift away from taxation of more mobile factors like capital to taxation of less mobile factors like labor and consumption. In the absence of international policy cooperation, where we have a cooperative arrangement at the supranational level that would set a uniform tax rate on capital, what would prevent governments from competing to attract capital, thereby driving down tax rates in a race to the bottom dynamic. Alternatively, if there is no international policy cooperation and races to the bottom are to be avoided, UBI could increase the incentive to adopt more protectionist policies and to reduce capital mobility. This in turn would depress overall welfare and economic growth. So that's my economic arguments against UBI. Second, is it politically feasible? Just recently, the citizens in Switzerland have voted against an initiative to introduce a generous universal basic income. In this case, the median voter has expressed in the turnout to this decision was against a universal basic income. It seems that there is apprehension to give away free money to everyone. Of course, the political dynamics could change if the median voter is in a position to demand more transfers or more insurance against losing his or her livelihood. My question is then, how can UBI be made politically feasible without going through a phase of massive disruption? Put differently, isn't it plausible to think that without disruption, there won't be support for UBI, but with disruption, it will be impossible to implement it because the force of disruption is so large? What would a political situation look like in which there is no resistance to a policy proposal to introduce UBI, or in which the winners could credibly commit to compensate the losers? Third, my third point, my third question, is UBI normatively desirable? UBI has, as you pointed out, has a decidedly liberal or even a libertarian streak. If people want to use their UBI to curl up on the couch, get hammered, and watch trash TV all day, every day, then that's their choice, right? We'll be okay with that. However, long-standing traditions of political thought have held that humans need to be incentivized to work in order to achieve their true potential. Otherwise, they'd be either wasting their creator's gift, that would be the conservative variant, or they could not develop their right class consciousness, that's the Marxist variant. Both would be morally reprehensible. And I leave you with 2 quotes, one from the Bible, 2 Thessalonians, "For even when we were with you, we gave you this rule: the one who is unwilling to work shall not eat. We hear that some among you are idle and disruptive. They are not busy, they are busybodies. Such people we command and urge in the Lord Jesus Christ to settle down and earn the food they eat. That's the Bible. Now, August Bebel, the founder of social democracy, we agree with the Bible. He says, "He who does not work shall not eat." Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to your response before we open it up to the floor.
Thank you so much, Christian, for these excellent comments. And probably I'll start with your empirical observation that I fully share, of course, that the years between 1950 and 1990 were exceptional years. And this is somehow, let's say, a confirmation of my argument. Somehow that at that time, when you remember the borders and the fence and the iron wall in Europe, the iron fence and the wall in Europe, that at that time labor was somehow scarce and capital was abundant because the capital could not be or was not able to be invested abroad. So capital was relatively abundant and labor was relatively protected by the wall. Also the West German labor force was protected. That is the irony of the history, that it was not only a fence to keep people back in Eastern Europe, it was also a protection for the Western European workers. And their labor was scarce, was short, and so their wages were relatively higher. And that was the golden time for the workers in Germany and in the West. And that was the reason why at that time the power play between capital and labor was in favor of labor. Then your first question about whether it is economically sound. First of all, I share your argument that if you are going to tax capital, you would somehow shoot into your own legs, because then you would somehow lower the speed, lower the technological improvements, and lower the capitalization of the production process, what at the end would be negative for the productivity of labor and for the wages, to say so. That's true. That's exactly the reason why basically, this is a finesse probably in the model, I'm not going to tax capital in a way. I'm going to treat capital owners, the income for capital owners, the same as the income for workers. So I'm not going to tax firms. I'm not going to tax companies. I'm actually, I would take the production process as a black box to leave the decision whether they are going to employ workers or whether they are going to invest in capital. This is a decision of the firm. I'm not going to intervene in the black box. What I'm doing is I'm going to tax the owners of the production factors. Is it labor? Is it the capital owner? Is it the owner of a robot? I'm not going to tax the robot. I'm going to tax the owner of the robots. Now, I understand your argument. That is well done. Then you could argue then, but that's a very good question actually to repeat my argument, to make this point even sharper, to illustrate this point. Let me be a German capitalist. And according to the value-added principle, I'm taxed with my world income. So it does not matter whether I'm going to invest the money in Germany or in China or in a country not applying a value-added tax. At the end, I have to declare my world income. And my world income is the basis to be taxed. So it doesn't, when I'm gonna escape Germany somehow, I'm still the capital owner, and that is not the question where I'm gonna invest. It doesn't matter where I'm gonna invest. Whatever I have as a reflow, as a profit, as an inflow of money, as a return on investment, I have to tax. And so I think I'd at least try to avoid your well-taken point that actually today you have Google going to Ireland just to avoid US tax payments, and then they pay a ridiculous amount of about the 50 million tax with a profit of total profit for the company of $1 billion. That is ridiculous. So I'm going to say you should not try to tax Google. This is, as you said, as long as you get not an international agreement on taxing, what I think will not come forever, there is no way to tax Google. But take the owners. Why should you tax Google? Google is a company. They are doing good and they are doing probably not so good things. Depends on the perspective. But at the end, this is a company. It has not an impact on people. I mean, the money flows do not have an impact on people. They have an impact on people when they are going to pay wages to their workers and when they are going to pay capital income to their shareholders and when they are going to distribute profits to the owners of the companies. Is it politically feasible? And then you quoted the vote in Switzerland. Yes, actually for the connoisseurs in this room, you may have heard about my accent that I'm Swiss. I'm Swiss and German, by the way. So I have followed the polls and the votes in Switzerland really intensively. And I learned something. And the lesson I learned comes from the analysis of reforms. And the lesson I learned is, as you said, as you fully right said, is that to have the confirmation, to have the acceptance, to have the momentum to support an idea like the UBI, you have to find winners. You have to address the people that will profit from this system. That is exactly the reason why I have overloaded the book by not just presenting the expenditure side. I did not just argue about the UBI. What I did, I had also in mind the income side, the taxing side, the tax system, what actually has nothing, on the first glance, has nothing to do with the UBI. The point is that if you have the value-added tax, if you are going to deal, if you are going to levy the same tax on all production factors, I could easily show you, and actually this is the trick of the book, this is the public, that is the marketing trick of the book that we have developed a so-called UBI calculator, where you could, on the internet, just put your income and then you can see whether you will profit or not from the UBI. And the point is that all the lower incomes, they will profit. Why? Because the lower incomes stem mostly from labor. And because I'm going to tax capital higher, the capital owners, they will, I'm not saying lose, they will relatively lose, and low income households, they will benefit. And that's exactly what we learned from the economic or political economic analysis of reforms. You should generate, you should produce winners. And the winners in my system are the lower qualified and lower paid workers. These are the females, the women, because most of them will not have qualified for a full pension because they have breaks into their biography and they did work sometimes part-time and not full-time, so they would not get the full pension. And with the UBI, they would have the same as their husbands and the same as all the others, all over their life. So that's exactly the point, and I agree that you have to generate, that you have to show and to have to address the winners, you have to motivate and to mobilize the winners to support such an idea and such a reform. Last point, that's the most difficult point, because as I've said before, I'm an economist, and when you ask me questions about normative, whether it's desirable or not, an economist is helpless. That's not my core competence to discuss about normative things. I would just say, as an economist, I would just say that I have a probably curious view about religion. For me, religion or rules are somehow, this is an attempt for a society to regulate the behavior in a way that somehow, as a society, the outcome is being maximized. That means that we are not going to kill us. So the Bible is the story that we should not kill us, that we should somehow go along in a friendly way. And so I think we need a kind of Bible, we need a kind of institutions, we need a kind of behavior to organize relationship for the 21st century. And again, I'm not sure whether the first sentence in my Bible would be that we should have to work to survive. I would say we have many ideas to let the machinery, the robots do the work, and to live without having this urgence to do unhealthy jobs, just not to suffer and to starve.
Thank you very much, Thomas. We can now take questions from the audience. Yes, please, in the back.
I really like this idea a lot. I think a very good service to society is it would remove the whole idea of money from the main purpose of your work, and you would actually work at something that really you can contribute something to society. So you can do actually your best work in this environment because you're not concerned with whether you're going to survive or die. However, I have a question about the firm profits not being taxed, and that the owners will be taxed when there's a distribution. What if the firm is not making distributions or making very small distributions? Then there's no tax consequence, right?
Correct.
I see.
Correct. I know what you are saying. I'm not sure whether this is the English word is thesauring. When you are going to keep back the profits to have a kind of reinvestments in the firm. In German, it's Thesaurierung. I have no idea how it is.
Retained earnings. Yeah.
Retained earnings. Yeah, that makes sense. Retained earnings. I see your point, and this would give an incentive to retain earnings in a way. But look, firms are not natural persons. I mean, at the end of the day, the owners would like to get something out of the companies. Yes. They cannot do this forever. Why should I invest in a company that forever retains the profits? So one day or the other, they will share. They will pay out profits.
Yes, they will have to provide incentives to pay dividends for people to buy shares. But yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
But, okay, so the other thing is, I'm not sure about the value-added tax. Is that usually refers to when you spend the money you pay?
No, I know what you mean, because this is something probably where I have to work on the translation. I know that the value-added tax in United States is an indirect tax.
Right.
It's like in Germany,
like a sales tax.
It's a consumption tax.
Right.
That is not the meaning.
Okay,
the
so
value-added tax is really where you produce value-added. I think the American term, I never understood why you call it value-added tax. In a way, it is a kind of consumption tax at the end. My value-added tax is a production tax. It's a tax that is levied on the outcome of a production, on the values you have created within a firm. And the value is the basis for wage. The wage is a part of value. It's like in the national accounts, for if you are aware of national accounts. In the national accounts, you are going to add on, you are going to allocate, you are going to aggregate the value added of single firms to a GDP, a gross domestic product. The gross domestic product is actually the aggregated value added in a country, minus the intermediates.
And the best benefit is that there is not going to be any more need for accountants.
That's
Especially
that's why all the accountants are against this proposal.
right.
Thank you. This was very good. Can you just speak to the effect you think it would have on the cost of goods and whether you would need to put any kind of caps or price controls, or how you would adjust for, inflation over time, something to that effect?
Excellent question. First of all, I would not have controls. This is a liberal approach, so I would say supply and demand are going to determine the price. Second point, this is actually, now it becomes more complicated. One of the reasons why I'm going to finance it over my understanding of value added and not in the understanding of an indirect tax. Colleagues of mine in Germany, they are going to argue for an indirect consumption tax. The problem if you are going to levy an indirect consumption tax is that then you are going to increase the prices, and then an increase in price means a devaluation of the universal basic income. So you get in a kind of vicious circle. So that's the reason why I say I would do it with a direct tax. But you are still right. I think, and that makes this proposal so interesting, that for many, let's say, activities that nowadays are paid relatively low due to the market power of demand and supply. Let's say all the services, a lot of services for elderly people. It is extremely low paid for whatever stupid reason, because we are not willing to pay, and we have not to pay because we have the market power to say, if you are not going to care on mine or on me, if you are not going to somehow take the job for nothing, then you would starve. And there you are right. I think for labor-intensive jobs that you cannot substitute by robots, actually a lot of care for elderly people could be replaced and done by robots, but not everything. And I would not probably not like to get to be supported by a kind of robot. I would probably prefer to have someone somehow reading me a book or something like that. And you're right. There, the price level would increase. But I think it's somehow also a good reason for the UBI, because then you get all this purchasing power. These are these Keynesian demand-driven impacts, that you get the purchasing power for the poorer people. They spend all their money, and so you have a kind of positive multiplier, what is also beneficial for the economy as a whole.
Hi, thank you for your speech. There are some echoes here of the second counterpoint given, but whenever there's a question of the welfare state, something I'm reminded of is a certain text by the Polish economist Michał Kalecki. He wrote an essay in 1943 called Political Aspects of Full Employment. And basically the kind of point he gives is that when you are able to implement these, I know UBI isn't full employment, but like these kind of policies that give more power to labor, give more power to the winners of these UBI things, people who are currently losing. Essentially what happens then is that the capitalists or the people who lose from, for example, this UBI policy, they lose the power of the sack, and that they lose a lot of power in being able to threaten workers with just firing them, and this gives labor a lot more power naturally in that they aren't as dependent on their employers. You don't have to assemble strike funds if you want to fight for better rights, et cetera, et cetera. And essentially that what happens then is that there must be intensification of political power for people who would lose from something like UBI. And this is something we empirically saw in the 60s here in the US, and that with the kind of the peak of the welfare state, we also had the rise of the carceral state with LBJ, and this is something that has continued to today. And then, yeah, this didn't manage to maintain itself, as we all know. So basically, my question is that, given all of these difficulties and given what Kalecki has written, what sort of political concerns should we have in not only implementing UBI, but also managing to sustain it?
This is actually a very good point, and I forgot to answer already a question that has been raised before, because I'm not, when you talked about price regulations and so, I'm not going to say that the trade unions should become, should somehow, are not necessary anymore, that they could be given up. In the contrary, I think all the relationships between employers and employees, all the relations about market power in the labor market, this should be negotiated. This should be dealt with in the relationship of trade unions and employees organizations. And this is specifically somehow to balance the power in the labor market and not to make some groups or one side of the market too powerful and to create monopsons or other forms of market power that at the end would destroy the interplay of supply and demand. So and that's again a reason why the Social Democrats have some problems with this solution, because they have an image, they have a kind of model in mind about the relationship between employers and employees, that they would like to support the weaker. They would like to protect the weaker side against market power of the employers. And somehow I would say, once you have covered the minimal subsistence, then it is much, much more difficult to exploit employees. And I think that, let's say, the bargaining of wages will probably getting out of trade unions, but there are many other things that they should deal with, and one is, for example, education, further education. They should somehow make on a firm level the relationship between employers and employees much more efficient, and so on. It is a shift probably in tasks between trade unions and employers organization compared to today. So I would not say that they are gonna lose powers and that all the power goes to the labor, but there will be a shift in the relationship.
What about poor countries? I mean, there are some countries where even the average income is not enough to distribute in an equal way. So how could you treat that?
Very good question, thank you. My model is just for Germany, and I would say that this is a model for relatively higher developed countries, and I would define higher developed with regard to the capital intensity. And you are fully right, in countries that are lower developed, according to my definition, where you have a more labor-intensive production process, you may probably not start with a UBI, even if India is going to implement a kind of UBI, but to be fair, the Indian UBI will be on the very, very poorest level. It is just a question of making the distribution of poverty aid more efficient than today. They are going to start with a kind of UBI. So the answer to your good question is, this is a model for relatively capital-intensive economies, not for the poorer economies.
Thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. And I just wanted to make a couple of really quick counterpoints regarding the, I guess, the negative impact on technological innovation. I do think there are potentially some good reasons for taxing entities such as Google. Namely, I think capital accumulation in the tech space is very frequently facilitated through intellectual property laws. And a lot of times those actually can have an opposite effect on innovation.
Yeah.
I think the bulk of the innovation a lot of times in the tech sphere really comes from the open source community, for example. And typically employees that work at tech companies are made to actually sign a form that relinquishes anything they invent as an employee to, you know, as intellectual property of the company. So just wanted to make those additional points there.
No.
Thank you.
This is a fair question, and this is a similar question Christian already asked me at the very beginning, and I fully agree. I would not step down from the argument that you are right in a way, that you should avoid somehow to tax capital, because if you are going to tax capital, you have all the effects you have just mentioned. And so my solution, my outcome, my proposal, my, let's say, compromise is not to tax the implementation of capital, but just when people take out the profits of their investments. And I think this makes a difference. Again, this was my argument before, that somehow the capitalists would like to get the return on investment. And so they have to invest somewhere their money. And actually empirical studies show us that taxing capital, the tax system is just a minor factor in the decision process where you are going to invest. This is actually a paper that has probably, that is also common for non-economists. It is a paper by a Nobel Prize winner, Robert Lucas, who has written a paper about why doesn't capital flow from rich to poor countries. Actually, it should flow, all the money should flow to lower developed countries because there is a labor-intensive production there, so capital rents must be extremely high there. Why does it not flow from rich to poor countries? And the answer is very, very simple. Why are you not going to invest your money in Latin America or in Africa? Because you do not trust. So you do not trust political stability. You do not trust the protection of your property rights. You do not trust whether you can take the money out when you want, that it will probably be nationalized. So it matters, but other factors are more important. And that's the reason why I say, if you're going to tax people, I would never, why should I move from Hamburg to another city outside Germany just because the interest rate, the tax rate on my capital income is raised by a couple of %. I would never give up my house, my neighborhood, my friends, my relatives, my life. That's the difference. Financial money is very mobile. Physical money is rather immobile. It's much more immobile than we think.
Hi. So if I'm understanding your UBI program correctly, fundamental tenet is, I guess, the dismantling of the existing welfare state and all of its institutions.
Yeah.
If we take that, and then we also take a probably inarguable notion that UBI is intended to minimize or eliminate inequality,
Yep.
I'm curious how you square those two things, because obviously the welfare state comprises much more than just cash aid.
Yeah.
There's housing aid, food stamps, childcare
Yeah.
services. Isn't there just a sort of inherent disproportionate impact across the spectrum?
Good point. The answer is German specific probably. In Germany, you have a kind of system that is organized over money flows, payments, retirement payments, unemployment benefits, social security support, and so on. And I'm concentrating on this kind of social welfare state. I'm not, and food stamps or other, let's say, direct material support is rather seldom. It is actually almost non-existent. The share is tiny compared to the money flows. So
take healthcare then. Like, if someone's living off of just your 12,000 euro per year, and there's an unexpected medical expense, doesn't
good
that
point.
ruin something?
That is what I promised to say probably. Of course, you need a kind of health insurance. And you have to pay this health insurance payments from the UBI. And the question is then, what is covered by this health insurance? And the answer is, you cannot avoid, but this is independent whether you have a UBI or not. You cannot avoid to run into a two-class system, that some people have just covered their minimal health diseases, and others are going to pay on a private basis much more. Yeah, that's how it is. You cannot, this is, I think, unaffordable to have a full coverage of things that are possible for everybody. I mean, this is unfair, but it's how it is. I mean, to have a kind of treatment against cancer could cost easily $1 million or more US dollar. And if you are gonna, this you cannot afford as a public social treatment for everybody.
Economics, liberal economics, in my view, is a very normative, even though economists like to say it's not normative. You're expressing a belief that we cannot have an egalitarian society.
I fully understand what you are saying. Then you have to
so it's very normative, very normative.
Sure, sure. Then you have to search for a random process.
Or you can start taxing the Rothschilds and people like that a little bit higher.
Then you have to do a rationally, you can, no, look, for sure, I think we agree that you cannot have a full treatment of, let's say, cancer treatment paid by public fundings.
Why is that?
Because it costs you one treatment costs you so much money, and because that is probably the consequence of the success of the medical system, that at least in Germany, where I have the data, about 50% of the people will somehow get cancer sooner or later.
That's such a conservative UBI. That's like...
It has nothing to do with the UBI. Nothing. Nothing.
Well, it is a normative view that you should not tax the Rothschilds and the other hyper wealthy in Europe. I noticed in your graph that you capped out at a 40% tax rate. So it's really not a progressive tax rate that you're recommending.
No.
In fact, the Rothschilds and the ultra wealthy in Europe would pay the same tax rate as somebody making 200,000 euros a year.
This is a flat tax. You can have a higher flat tax rate if you want. The problem is, if you have a higher flat tax rate, then the incentive to perform will be lower.
I would argue against that. My friend over here talked about Kalecki, right? I think one of the great economists of the 20th century. And one of his prime theories was that profit, one of the main generators of profit actually is state spending. That whatever the state spends returns as profit. So therefore, taxes, if you're going to tax the wealthy and turn around and spend it, it has no effect whatsoever on incentives, because their profits would go up equal to what they're taxed.
Yes, the problem is then we run into a question that has been asked before. If you are going to tax wealthier people different from, let's say, less gifted or less wealthy people, people with less income. We are talking about income, not wealth, by the way. Income is a flow, wealth is a stock. So I'm not going to talk about wealth taxing. It's an income tax. It's the regular annual income and not the wealth. It's not the stock you're going to tax.
No, all I'm saying is that whatever is taxed, say the Rothschilds, whatever, right? If the state of Germany or the United States decided to double its or triple its spending on healthcare or whatever in taxed wealth, the fact is that the income of the wealthy would go up because of all that spending would flow through as profits. So it would be a break even.
I hate to interrupt. Okay. I really do, because this is such a fascinating discussion, and we should definitely have more than one econ and political science and political economics seminar on it, and we will. I promise that. But for now, I would like to thank each and every one of you. Thank you, Thomas. And as I said, there's wine and cheese waiting out there for you, and it's free. So if that's not socialism, I don't know what is.
Well, it's free, but it's only 3 pieces of cheese and 1 glass for everybody. So enjoy. Thank you.